Alrighty, I think we got it. Welcome everyone to another edition of Professor CardWorthy, the Money Explainer. And we're here to talk about all things financial, from both a consumer angle as well as from a business angle. I've been a student of the payments business for about 30 years and later a professor, and so I'm here to share as much knowledge as I can. We have over the years, for over these 30 years that I've been doing it, we've helped millions of consumers to understand their financial products and how to save money and best use them and save their time too on top of all that. And we've at the same time have been able to help banks become competitive and stay consumer sensitive also. And it's worked out fairly well. But we try to cover all financial areas, including investing, savings, borrowing, all that sort of thing, although I was primarily focused in the credit card and debit and prepaid area of payments. So today I want to get right to it. Our lesson today is called Budget Buster Late Fees. Now, you know, it's very common today, paycheck to paycheck families, young struggling families particularly. Everyone has to deal with a situation sometimes of what bills to pay. And almost everything that you pay today, if you pay it past its due date, you're going to get tangled up in some kind of a late fee. And so I have to confess, but this is what we did about 40 years ago. We found, my family and I found ourselves in that position. I mean, there wasn't enough cash, and back then we didn't have emergency cash. There was hardly credit cards being used at the time, and we just didn't have any backup funds to keep, you know, the water running and the phone on and the heat on and the gas bill paid. So we came up with one solution, a novel solution, and that was, here's all the checks for the utilities, the phone, the gas, the electric, and all that stuff. We took those checks, and here's the envelopes that we have for the bill payments, and we just simply inserted the wrong check in the wrong envelope. Now, that's I wouldn't encourage you to do that today. That is unethical, and forgive us, Lord, for doing that. But we didn't have really many other alternatives to do, and so what was the reaction? Well, back in those days, the companies got them and they called and they said, oh, there must have been an oversight on your part. You know, you sent us the gas check and we're the phone company. And they all called very nice about it. They said, in fact, that happens many times with their older customers. And it was fine. They said, we'll send it back and just, you know, resend us the correct one. So our mission was accomplished. All we needed was a delay. And it took about 14 days for that all to get cleared up, and by that time we had the money. And fortunately, my wife never had to do that again because we were able to get the income and get that going again. But it's one of those things where we get hit with these nuisance fees, is what they are also called. And the interesting thing is that most of the fees that you are charged, late fees, on things like utilities, they're regulated. And so they have to go through a process to justify passing cost on to consumers, even late fees. So they're largely cost driven. That's why you may only pay a $5 or $10 late fee on a utility bill, but not when it comes to the banking products. As a matter of fact, while they're cost driven, late fees, let me slide my little whiteboard over here so you can get you in on the conversation here. The thing is with late fees, they are a golden goose for banks in all respects, especially in the credit card area. And today, it's not uncommon to get hit with a $35, even a $38 late fee, and they're fired off on a hair trigger, basically. I mean, if you're a minute past midnight late, whammo, here comes the fee. You're being assessed $30 to $35 or whatever it is. Now, the thing is, let me get my pointer here. If you go through the calculations of this and you consider the processing costs And then the cost of the fact that it's electronically processed. I mean, there's no human interaction here. You just program the computer, the system that's being used, to just simply say, you know, at this time, charge that fee, and it's very simple. And then, of course, it does boost the balance and all. Now, the other cost of it that some consumers may not realize is that there is a risk cost. The risk being that if you do make a late payment, the chances are you're going to be late again. And the amount of what they call the delinquency rate in the industry could also increase for the issuer. So they kind of build that into it. But there's no human interaction in these late fees. That's even true in with a banking account, and that's the non-sufficient fund fees, all that. We'll talk about that another time, because that's a major area that I will share with you in another episode. But the other thing is there's very little like notification costs. Like down here with the utilities, they may actually give you a phone call, you know, to say that you're late, like they did in our case to say we had mixed up the checks. But they don't, the credit cards don't even do that. They may send you a computer-generated notice that you were charged, but it's not like they're going to call you up the day before, the day after, and say, hey, you know, are your payments due? That's just not going to happen. So you run all those factors through and run it through the formula, and you come out, what's the cost to do a late payment to a card issuer for to make a late payment? It's about $1.50. And up here we're charging $38. So it's about a 96% profit margin. It is a profit center for the banks. And I'll explain that a little bit further here, because typically right now, what they call the 30-day late, that means if you have made a payment 30 days past the due date, that you're considered a 30-day late. And that's what's reported, of course, to the credit bureaus and so on. But if you're just a day past the due date, you get assessed a fee. That's not reported to the credit bureaus, but that figure, instead of being 2 to 3% of the 30-day lates, it's considerably higher. And I know that because I've worked with banks. I can't get into specific numbers with some of the issuers because it's of non-disclosure agreements, but I can tell you in every case, late payment fees on credit cards is a very significant revenue source. As a matter of fact, if you look at a bank that, say, has 1 million customers, and it's the delinquency rate is around 2 to 3%, they're generating about $3 million a month just on late fees. We're not talking about any other fees, annual fees. We're just talking about late fees, and that's $3 million a month in the industry wide. The figures range. Most of my investment banker friends that I work with, we've come to the consensus that it runs industry-wide. It's about somewhere between $12 and $15 billion is generated from credit card late fees. And so how did that all come about? I mean, how did we get up to $38? Well, back, of course, in the day when I'm talking about these utility bills, with my wife and I doing that goofy little thing of sending the wrong checks, typically it was a $5 fee or so. In fact, you could bounce a check at the bank and it was $5, maybe $10. And that, when you got up into the 1980s, when I started following the credit card business, it was very typical for banks to charge a late payment fee of maybe $5, $10. And in most cases, they wouldn't do it. They would give you 5 days past the due date before they would charge the fee. And one major bank, which at one time was the largest bank in the United States, they would give you 15 days on their credit card before they would charge the fee. But what happened in 1990, the whole market shifted to where up to that point, banks were almost all charging 19.8% with a $20 annual fee. Well, what happened is you had the Discover card, which was launched in the mid-80s, came out as a no-fee card. And then in 1990s, then there were actual Visa and MasterCards issued through companies or banks, financial institutions associated with AT&T, General Motors, and General Electric. They were three big ones. And they were built upon no annual fee. So they were putting the competition on the annual fee. And so with that fee income starting to pull away, I mean, in fact, that I remember AT&T, you know, that it was no fee for life. They actually made that promise. But that pressure started forcing out the annual fees. And of course, that put pressure back on the banks to where are we going to get this fee income? So the way to do it was just start jacking up the late fees. And so they took them up to around close to $20. Now, this is a little crazy, but I actually went to a banking seminar. That's been quite a while ago, but the discussion was how to maximize fee revenue. And they were trying to say, okay, you know, it's hard, the consumer will be very resistive or whatever you want to call it. They wouldn't take kindly, let's put it that way, to a late fee that exceeded $20. They figured that was the maximum because it's all based upon what the market would bear. In fact, that was the whole message in the conference was you can charge whatever, but it's what the market will bear. Well, the other thing, the interesting thing they discussed was what day to set as the due date. And they discovered that any weekend day was ideal. Sunday was the best because consumers had very few options to make a very, very last minute payment to avoid the fee. Although legally, if it's a due on a Sunday, you really have the Monday to make the payment. Most people don't realize that. But then something else happened. Okay, so we got the annual fee pushed out, so that pushed up the late fees. And then along comes 2009, and that's when the CARD Act, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau came in, and there were a lot of reforms in the industry, and the over-limit fees on credit cards got pushed out. So what do you think happened? Back to the late fees. And so that pushed up the late fees then up into the $30 range, and now they're closer to $40. That's a little history lesson about it, but let's get to the thing of what you can do about this thing. And there are 6 things I'm going to recommend to you to do that eliminate the problem, and I'm talking about credit cards. As far as your other bills are concerned, that's another area, and you'd have to figure that out yourself. But with credit cards, the main thing to do, number one, is to pay that minimum balance, minimum payment, as soon as it becomes due. You know, they have what's called the payment due date and the closing date. So you get your statement after the closing date. When it passes that closing date, then you'll be, if you're online, you'll see it'll say this is your next payment due. Pay it as quickly as you can. That way it eliminates and takes away that whole late payment part out of it. That pain is gone. There's no way you're going to get assessed that because you have met the minimum payment. And then the second recommendation for you to do is to make a second payment later in the month, whatever. It doesn't have to be before the due date, as long as it's before the closing date, and that will, of course, bring your balance down. And you can, you wouldn't up here. It might only be $20 or $30. Down here, you might want to add another $100 to knock the balance down, and that's a good strategy. And you've already taken again the late thing out of the equation. The other suggestion to do is most issuers today, believe it or not, they will, if you request, they will change the due date to make it more conforming to your pay cycle, for example. And that's a very good move. I mean, you have consumers really sweating at the end of the month trying to make their rent, the mortgage payment, whatever. And then they got all these credit card bills in there, and then that's when they get caught. So if you can move it back, to an easier time in the month, middle of the month, you generally can do that. And you can do it many times just online. They'll give you that option and request it. I would definitely take a look at that. Not all banks offer it, and some of the small banks may not, but it is offered by a pretty wide range. The other thing, of course, is to set up account notifications. They can come to your phone, through an app, where they can just come as text messages to you, reminding you of your due date, reminding you perhaps of your balance. I mean, golly, today they've got it. You get these notifications. You can make a purchase in the store, and by the time you get to the car, you already they've already confirmed it for you. Hey, somebody just made a charge, and that's pretty cool. So definitely take advantage of that. That'll keep you out of hot water too. And then, of course, the other thing is you might want to keep in mind that with credit cards, it's a little different. Some people pay their mortgages on a weekly basis, or maybe an installment loan on a weekly basis. It works good for budgeting. When it comes to credit cards, a lot of issuers won't let you make more than 2 payments in a billing cycle. So that's what I'm saying. Make your minimum and then make your big one. If you want to make more than 1 or more than 2 payments, you better check with the bank to see if they permit that. They generally don't because of fraud. It's what they call balance boosting. It's something that we can talk about at another time. Now, the last one here is a very important one to keep in mind, and that is asking for a waiver. Now, that's not asking for the fee back. When you get into a situation like a natural disaster, I mean, here in Florida we have the hurricanes, anything, I mean the fires, whatever. It could be a personal disaster. You could have had a fire in the house, you could have lost someone in the family. When that happens, when any of that stuff happens, you know, call your card issuer and tell them. I went through Hurricane Irma here, and I live close to the water, so we had to evacuate. And part of the evacuation was when I drove up to Atlanta. When I got up there, on my checklist, I called my different banks and told them the situation, and you know, asked if they could give me a waiver on making a payment for a while till we assess the damages and everything, see how it turned out. And no problem. Most of the card issuers, you know, they would waive the late, not just the late fee, they would waive even the minimum payment for, in some cases, 3 months. And but of course they're still collecting interest, so it's not like they're losing money. They're just giving up their right to charge you that nasty $35 or $38 fee. But do that, and that's a good piece of advice to keep in mind as you go forward. And just remember that, you know, all of this is well, it's just something, again, it's what the market will bear. That's what the whole point of these late fees, and do your best to stay out of that trap. And of course, the other thing, as I mentioned, just because you pay late past the due date, that's not the same as being 30 days late on your credit card. I mean, if you don't make a payment and then the next payment's due, you haven't made it by the time the next one's due, then you're going to be in trouble. And that's really, I mean, the $38 fee is a pain in the arse, but if you get reported to the credit bureaus as making a late payment, that's an instant damage. I mean, it's 20, 30 points off your score, in some cases as high as 50 points. So, and it takes a while for that to go away. I mean, 1 current payment will help it, 6 currents will help it, but it's 2 years before it actually really has no impact on your score, and then after that it still stays on your credit file for 7 years. Well, anyway, that's today's lesson. I hope you learned something. And if you want to learn more, there's a lot more to this story on the blog as well as on the website and on the podcast. So, I mean, we have it all covered. You can, the website, CardWorthy.com, that's the epicenter. Just go there. You can find contact, the podcast. We're on almost all the podcasts. There's still a few that are take another week or so for them to get us up on their platform, but we're there, and of course the blog, and also consider being a friend of CardWorthy. Now, we, as part of the friend of CardWorthy, we're asking for donations right now because we've made huge investments here in the last 18 months, not just for this program, but for all the programs or websites that we've built over the last couple of months, and we just need some help, and that's all explained. You can go right to the website, podcast, or even you can watch the episode on YouTube called Meet the Professor. Talks a little more about it, but the real details are on there. There's a GoFundMe page. Go to GoFundMe, CardWorthy, type that in, Professor CardWorthy. It'll pop right up. It'll give you the whole story, the history of not only myself, but of what we're trying to do and why we need your help at this time. And of course, we accept any kind of donation from anyone. Small is good. If it's your business, you make a substantial donation. There's a lot of things we can do for you, and we'll certainly be contacting you because we have a lot of other services that you can either get complimentary as a business. Everybody gets the newsletter. The Friends of CardWorthy newsletter comes out every month, and that's for donors only. So, you know, get on the list. Give us a couple of bucks. We really, really appreciate it. And I appreciate you giving us the time here today to share this story and to share this information. I hope you found it helpful. Are you CardWorthy? If you are, that's great. But if you're not, it's going to take some time. All my students eventually become CardWorthy, and I'm sure you will be too. So anyway, have a nice day, and I hope that I gave you some information that was helpful, and also hope that that I maybe put a smile on your face. So have a good day. That's it. So we're going to wrap it up. Goodbye from Professor CardWorthy.